So now that the dust has finally settled on the 2021 PlayStation Showcase, we can start to look at this more holistically based off of what we did and did not see at the event, because that's what's most noteworthy here is that we've been following a lot of games, rumors, studios, and there are discussions about what we might see here. Right now that we know what wasn't there, we can paint a much better picture of what next year looks like, but also 2023 and beyond. And we can shape a really good picture, actually, based off of Sony's strategy and what we've been hearing and seeing the company play out since PS5 launched. And so, with that said, let's really go over everything that we know so far. Now, this is where it can get a bit overwhelming when we just know that there are so many layers going on here when it comes to, confirmed games, the rumors, and how just those two elements alone often get confused or mixed together, and then all the studios that we follow and cover, and whether we do know about what they're working on or don't. Sometimes when there's when we don't know what they're doing, we may have a rumor pointing us in a good direction of what they're up to, but oftentimes it's just a matter of developer X, Y, and Z is clearly working on a new, big budget game, and we won't know until they're ready to show it, but we can always base it off of what they, last shipped, how far or how long ago they shipped that project. There are so many things to keep up with, and with this PlayStation Showcase, at the very least, we do have a good idea of what's coming in that short term, right? So Gran Turismo 7, March 4th, 2022, PS4, PS5, it should hit that date. You would at least hope that all these games that we're going to be talking about will hit their release dates. Uncharted, the Legacy Collection, that's kind of one that sprang up, not really out of nowhere. We knew that there was a PC port coming, but that will actually ship first on PS5 early 2022. God of War Ragnarok sometime in 2022. It seems like there is a little bit of doubt that maybe the game won't ship that year, but I would imagine that it's going to. If they had the confidence to say that, yeah, sometime in 2021, and that didn't seem very believable, you got to figure at some point throughout next year, it'll probably ship, and even if it's the back half of the year, at least it'll ship in 2022. Spider-Man 2 is where we're getting into the long term, right? So Spider-Man 2 is a 2023 game, and that seems like a safe year to throw out there. It's not like they gave a release window of spring or autumn or anything like that. I mean, the game is so far out, you don't really want to be even humoring that idea. Also, Wolverine, we know that is much further out as well, but I've made the point where it's Insomniac has two teams going at the same time. That doesn't necessarily mean it can't ship close to Spider-Man 2, but we do know that the game is very early in development, and for those curious, we do have confirmation that yes, it very much is a full-scale game. It's not some sort of small-scale Miles Morales thing, where the creative director Brian Horton did confirm this over on Twitter, so for any doubt as to the length or size of this game, it's going to be a big one, but that's probably at a minimum late 2023, but you would think, okay, probably further out, and that's the one game where it's the only disappointing aspect of it is we learned about it so soon. I'm sure there's still going to be exciting things coming from them, but for now at least we do have a good idea of what they're up to. Going back to the short term, though, we know that Horizon Forbidden West is coming out February 18th, so that's right next to Gran Turismo. Also, we've got these partnered projects that aren't necessarily under the PS Studios umbrella, so Sony's aligning themselves with games like Forspoken or Ghostwire Tokyo for, timed exclusivity. And so if we want to, talk about the potential for upcoming PlayStation showcases or really state of plays, blog posts, which they're probably still going to do plenty of those before we ever see another long-form showcase like we recently just got. Those aren't really ever going to be a guarantee. If this year wasn't indicative of that, it should be. But in the short term, we did not see a lot of things, right? So this is kind of like what a lot of people were theorizing going into this particular showcase, like The Last of Us Remake or The Last of Us Factions. In fact, it seems like a lot of people were hoping that Factions was finally going to get a formal reveal at this event. But as we discussed maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, based off of all the prominent job listings that they have for this project, it's an open secret, right? It's not really, I mean, we know this game's coming, but it just seems like one of two things is going on here, where either the game was rebooted or in trouble, or it's just taking much longer than expected, or really it's a matter of that typical Naughty Dog scope creep where the game's just getting larger and larger, and so we might be looking at, we know for a fact that it really is a standalone multiplayer project, the first that Naughty Dog's really ever done, so it's actually exciting to see what that really will look like from them, but that will you would still think that maybe we'll see that in the next 6 to 12 months, but that's one that many thought would be here. It wasn't. The Last of Us remake, they might want to coincide this with the HBO TV series, which we don't really have a good roadmap of where that is exactly, just that the Visual Arts Service Group started that around 2018 or really 2019, right? Because they were still kicking around a lot of ideas before settling on the Last of Us remake, then at some point that getting handed over to Naughty Dog. So we don't really have a good idea of how far along that one is or when we'll see it. But and as we'll discuss in a second here, there is the idea that Sony wants to maybe coincide some of these releases with the PlayStation Productions version of all these projects, right? So we know that Sony has PlayStation Productions, which will be TV and film. The rumor that we talked about recently was Twisted Metal coming back and Twisted Metal coinciding with the Twisted Metal TV series. Now that's confirmed, but the game isn't. So if they want to do that for The Last of Us remake with HBO, then, that would certainly add up to a degree, right? But anyway, other short-term things. The Firesprite acquisition was very recent. That was announced, a mere, 2 days prior to the showcase actually happening. And so that was kind of a last-minute thing where nobody really saw the Firesprite acquisition coming, but once it was there, it's like, well, okay, so are we going to see a new game announcement? Because with Firesprite, they've actually got a lot of staff. We're talking 250-something employees, and even though they don't have a large portfolio, you can see that they put out the Persistence VR in 2018, and then just the Persistence, the 2D version of that game, basically across multiple platforms. We know they've got multiple teams going. The rumor that we followed for a bit was a Horizon VR spinoff, but there's 2 other projects that they're hiring for, and so now we're looking at possibly 3 games. There's no guarantee that we'll see 1, 2, or all 3 of these anytime soon, but just that late acquisition told us that, okay, well, we've got another PS studio to follow here, and because they, again, have a lot of staff, and they only had basically 2 games put out in the last 2 years, which it's very manageable from a single team to do that, so what's everybody else working on? And that's where there might be something in the short term to show very soon. Then there's the Firewalk Studios partnership, which amongst the 3 recent partnerships that we got within this last year, it looks like that one might be the furthest along just based off the very little info we have, which is that it's a AAA multiplayer project and that it is playable. And that's a lot more that can be said against the Haven Studios project or Deviation Games, where they're both relatively new. They're brand new studios, essentially. So those ones are going to be very far out, but we can also just quickly say that for Haven, it's looking like that's a live service game. Deviation, we assume, might be multiplayer just based off of all the, the talent and the studio founders, although if you look at their job listings, I can't find any direct references to say multiplayer or live service, but that's just kind of a guess, not a guarantee. But amongst those 3 partnerships, it seems like Firewalk might be the furthest along, and so in theory, we should be seeing that before the other 2. Then Guerrilla Games, there's a well-documented second project going on there. They want to hire up to 400 employees, take on 2 projects, and that's what they've been doing for the last 3 years now, basically. And this is even, prior to them acquiring that new studio space in Amsterdam. So with that, we've got there's a creative director on it since 2018. So based off of 3 years of a dev time, we should be seeing a formal reveal within the next 6 to 12 months, and that will also dictate probably a late 2022 or possibly 2023, right? Again, we're trying to make a roadmap here. There's also the rumors, like for example, Silent Hill. We've covered it so many times, and in the deep dive conversations, the Too Long Didn't Watch Theirs. We've got a handful of different sites all reporting something relatively similar, that Konami shopping the IP around, and that as of recent, it looks like one contract has been secured by Bloober Team. We can't really pin down exactly what the other one is or who it's with, but again, a lot of the original rumors point to some sort of involvement with Sony. And there's also this MGS remake one, which may or may not be with Blue Point. I don't know why this one has so much legs to it, because there's nothing there to even look at, right? At least with the Silent Hill thing, there are a handful of sites, different sources, all claiming something similar to one another, they have no direct relation to each other, right? So there's something there. I don't know. I don't think this MGS thing is real per se, but at least with Blue Point, we have the the slip up of the acquisition, and now it's like it's getting to the point where it's like, why has this not been announced yet? So whether that's not, maybe that was actually a weird slip up that's unexplainable, at least for the time being. Maybe the conversation fell through, but at least with Blue Point, we know that there's been a long-standing Sony partnership there. Whether the acquisition happens today or a few months from now, or it doesn't happen at all, at the very least, that's still a developer that we should be keeping our eyes on, because we know there's some heavy Sony involvement, and it would really be quite odd at this point if the acquisition didn't happen, or at a minimum, Sony isn't contracting out yet another project out of them, right? But another rumor that we can point out is Arrowhead Games, and I don't think we've ever actually really touched on Arrowhead, developers of Helldivers. I think for a while everyone was assuming that their next game was going to be another, contracted PlayStation title, and it seems like we've had some recent teases that the next game actually is Helldivers 2, so it's kind of assumed at that point that, okay, we're going to see another Helldivers across, let's say PS4, 5, and PC, and that would be like a day-and-date game. They've done that before, so that wouldn't be all too surprising if that ended up happening. But what about long term, right? So that's kind of like the big deal here, because when we're looking at 2023 and beyond, there is so much going on. Bend Studio, a new IP. Housemarque, recent acquisition. They just shipped Returnal. London Studio, they've got plenty of job listings. They've got a AAA PS5 title coming. Pixel Opus, a project with Sony Pictures Animation, and they're also using Unreal Engine 5. Santa Monica's new IP, and that's not really a secret either. Looks like that's Cory Barlog's game. Sucker Punch Productions, Team Asobi, XDev, which is basically the wild card, right? We've said that before about Japan Studio, but Japan Studio was inherently an XDev thing, more or less, or at least in recent years, their final years, they were mostly doing external development projects. Now XDev is a global operation where we see things like Destruction All-Stars, right? So who knows what we're going to get out of them. It's really a toss-up at that point, right? We can have a lot of fun expecting something weird, crazy, unexpected out of them. Maybe more, with From Software, which would not be entirely... That wouldn't exactly be surprising, and it seems like there might be something going on there. But anyway, XDev, there's a lot that could happen. The other partnerships, like we mentioned, Deviation Games, Haven Studios, those are coming. And this is where we can also touch on the focus with PlayStation, right? The focus on multiplayer. So we do have Haven, Firewalk, Guerrilla Games' second project, which we think is probably going to be a multiplayer FPS of some kind. Last of Us Factions. Insomniac is openly hiring for a multiplayer of some kind. We don't know if that's going to be some sort of mode for, say, Spider-Man or Wolverine, or maybe something else entirely different. Ghost of Tsushima Legends. This is something that Sucker Punch will probably build upon. So we can very clearly see there is a calculated effort going on here to addressing one of Sony's sore spots in their lineup, which is multiplayer games. They had a good amount of them during PS3, but that really simmered down during PS4, where there was a larger focus on the AAA narrative experiences. And it's not to say that there wasn't variety amongst those experiences, right? So people, I think, are getting this a little bit mixed up, where there was definitely the big stuff and small stuff in between, right? So we had things like Dreams, and, we had racing games. We had things come from Japan Studio. We saw a lot of contract stuff come out where it was pretty interesting across PS4, right? There's certainly variety there, and we're still seeing that today with things like Destruction All-Stars, Returnal, Ratchet & Clank. They still do a lot of that cool stuff, but they have been sorely missing multiplayer, and this is where it gets even more interesting, right? Because it's not a matter of us not getting the single-player games anymore. We're getting that, we're getting the multiplayer, and now we have rumors coming in about, some classic PlayStation IP returning, like Wipeout, Sly Cooper, Twisted Metal. It seems like the Twisted Metal rumor is gaining a lot of traction, and that could coincide with the Twisted Metal TV series. Sly Cooper, we saw a nod during the recent PlayStation commercial intro for the showcase, right? There's actually a lot of references in there that are now being noticed, like the Silent Hill radio and a few other things. So it's just something where we could be looking at a lot of, it's all sounding really encouraging, actually. You've got a little bit of everything in there, where it could be a mix of the big budget single player from, say, PS4, the multiplayer variety of PS3, the continued interest in legacy PlayStation IP like Wipeout or Ratchet & Clank, of course, Sly Cooper potentially, right? So these are franchises that go to PS2 and even PS1 for their roots. Also, there is a elephant in the room here, which is the next generation PlayStation VR. We haven't even touched that because who knows, how that's really going to pan out when you consider the fact that one rumor that we had recently is that Sony wants, sort of a hybrid system going on where you've got a game that you can buy and it's got the normal 2D mode alongside a VR mode, right? And that sounds like that would get expensive with Sony trying to foot that budget across not only their own first-party games but also third-party. It seems like we'll get a full formal reveal sometime early next year. We know that recently developers were briefed on the headset, and so we can't say too much right now about PSVR and what that next-gen headset looks like, but that's where, again, it kind of it can complicate that roadmap even more in a good way, where it's like what games do or don't have VR modes, new IP, old IP, multiplayer, no multiplayer. If Sony can fire on all these cylinders and do it well, then we've got a lot to be excited for, especially when, it's amongst all this negative press, and a lot of it's understandable, right? We still have a company here that's slow responding to user criticism or not addressing it entirely, whether it's services, game prices, game upgrades, the slow rollout of PS5 features. If you have a PS5 and you're, feeling frustrated, it's totally understandable. Maybe you don't have a PS5, you're trying to buy one, and you're also frustrated with how that's happening right now. There's a lot of reasons to, again, be not super thrilled with the situation, but the software output, or at least the software outlook, it's sounding great. I just hope that the execution really is there. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you haven't yet, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan, and that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.